I saw that supercut of Typhoid Joe saying the N word a bunch of times, and I was unimpressed to say the least. I have an uncle that can say twice as many N words in half the time, but you don't see him bragging about it. I was disappointed when that clip came out because the conversation seemed to be about what words Joe was using rather than what Joe believes. And I happen to have a clip of him expressing what he believes in no uncertain terms. What Joe believes is that the disparities in test scores among racial groups is due to genetics. There's no evidence of this, there's no data. It's not really science as much as it's a feeling he has, a feeling in his gut. And if anyone else does not share that feeling, then they're blinded by political correctness. Is that a fair assessment, Joe?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, and I think there's a tremendous amount of white guilt involved.
White guilt. I don't have white guilt. I have a black dominatrix, and my safe word is the N word. Once a week, I go see her at her dungeon, and she ties me up in some awkward position, and she beats me and spanks me and whips me, and she pours hot wax all over my body, and she puts clothespins on my face and on my body and on my junk, and she whips the clothespins off with a riding crop. And since my safe word is the N word, there's no way I can get her to stop torturing me without making things really uncomfortable.
Involved in it as well. I mean, because basically what the IQ tests are showing when they do study differences in IQ and races, you're showing the rise of the superiority of the Asian race. I mean, Asians dominate those things, and everybody is sort of just like, well, that's let's not talk about that. Let's talk about white and...
Joe doesn't want us to talk about Asian Americans. So let's talk about Asian Americans. The reason for those high scores among Asian Americans in the United States is that 72% of high-skilled visas go to Asian immigrants. It's prioritized immigration. It's probably to make up for whatever past historical wrongs. There were plenty in this country. But what it means is say 5% of Chinese people have bachelor's degrees in China, but 50% of Chinese immigrants have bachelor's degrees. 15% of Indians have bachelor's degrees, but 70% of Indian immigrants have bachelor's degrees. In other words, there's no one group that's inherently smarter than the next. It's just circumstances that determine those factors. For example, we just have all the smart Asians in this country. It also explains why Asian Americans are on the top tier economically in this country. Incidentally, I will be discussing Typhoid Joe's testicles, so try to bear with me for a few more minutes.
In black, because that's more convenient and it's easier, and they could find a victim and they could find a perpetrator. And what you're also seeing, like, there's a lot of Asian groups that are furious because they're getting discriminated against about getting into colleges and universities. They have higher standards because...
They don't have higher standards in universities. That's illegal. That would be discrimination. But you know who has higher standards? Poor people. They have higher standards to get into college because they have to get the same scores, but they have like 50 million times more obstacles. They got to do things. They're too busy to learn because they got to do stuff like work. That kind of makes it difficult.
because they have such a high percentage of Asians that are getting into the universities. It's very strange because they're not vocal about it, and they're not publicizing it, and they're not screaming racism in the streets. But
they're not publicizing it, but somehow Joe, the UFC commentator who lives in Texas, has heard about it. Because he's got his ear to the ground over at Harvard Yard? No, of course it's publicized. There's a lawsuit. It's going to the Supreme Court. It is from the, let's see, what are they called? The Students for Fair Admission, which incidentally is not run by students. It's run by a bunch of white right-wing extremists who are using Asian American students as a cover to dismantle affirmative action. They've lost in court twice, and now they're going to the Supreme Court, which, well, I guess they'll probably win because, as we all know by now, the Supreme Court has a Republican bias. They've already dismantled voting rights, and they've already dismantled access to abortions. Now they're coming after the 14th Amendment through affirmative action programs, which they plan on dismantling and will be all but gone soon.
But they're the victims of it. They actually are the victims of hard work and success and excellent genetics.
Right. Well,
not publicizing it, and they're not screaming racism in the streets, but they're the victims of it. They actually are the victims of hard work and success and excellent genetics.
Right.
Excellent genetics. You heard it, folks. There's no science to back that up. It's just in his gut. It's a feeling he has in his gut. He believes that in spite of the affirmative action of those immigration programs, that it's genetics. Well, I guess I don't know if that means he's a racist, but maybe his guts are racist. He should look into getting a new gut. Now, Joe's been taking steroids. It's my understanding that Joe's been taking steroids most of his adult life. I imagine his testicles are like the last two marbles in a bag of marbles. Yet he walks around carrying those small, abnormally small baby testicles between his legs. He walks around with confidence. I'll bet women, they register surprise when they see his abnormally small testicles. And he notices this and he says, "I see you've noticed my abnormally small testicles. I work out a lot."